And she was busy drying herself, and I was in the shower, and I just put shampoo in my hair, and I was busy washing my hair when Kat said to me, I can hear something in the grass outside. So I was tall enough to peer over the grass screen, and there was old Blondie, this bloody lion, stalking us. And as soon as he saw my eyes, he locked his eyes into mine, and I stared him down. And with my other hand, I reached around and I found the bottle of shampoo, which I just used to use for my hair. And I picked up this family-sized bottle of Johnson shampoo, and I threw it at him. And I actually hit him on the head with the bottle of shampoo. And then I was out of that shower, stark bollocks naked. I ran to the camp, and I had my 9-3 hanging from the tent pole, and there were the lioness actually ran right through the camp and underneath the dining room table and knocked one of the chairs over. And the 3 women that were in camp by that stage were all fighting with each other to try and get in the one door of the Land Cruiser, which was parked in camp. And I was standing stark bollocks naked with shampoo in my hair and the rifle in my hand and lions running around all over the show. It was a rather frightening experience.
Welcome to the Big Game Hunting Podcast, where we help hunters like you prepare for the big game hunting adventures you've always dreamed of. Now, here's your host, John McAdams.
Hello, John McAdams here. Welcome to episode 155 of the Big Game Hunting Podcast. So today's episode is yet another in my latest mini-series on hunting in Africa. Last week, Kevin Robertson was on to talk about leopard hunting. Now that was a great show, and you should definitely go back and listen to episode 154 if you haven't already done so. Now, as promised, Kevin Robertson is back on the show again today to talk about lion hunting. As always, he has some great stories to share with us, and we also discuss the ins and outs of lion hunting, like how to evaluate a trophy lion, cartridge and bullet selection for lion hunting, shot placement and how it's different for the cats compared to plains game and buffalo, what can happen if your shot placement is not good, etc. We also touch on a couple of hot potato topics at the very end of the show today, the Cecil the Lion scandal from 2015 and the controversial practice of captive bred lion hunting. Now, before we get started with all of that, I do want to plug Kevin's book, The Perfect Shot 2. This was a revolutionary book when Kevin first published it back in the late 1990s. It is still an incredibly useful resource, especially the updated edition that is currently in print. If you have an upcoming hunt in Africa, or if you're just dreaming about hunting in Africa one day, then you need to buy this book and carefully study what he has to say. The information inside it is invaluable and reflects Kevin's decades of hard-earned experience as a professional hunter in Africa. If you pay attention to what he has to say and use the book as a guide to prepare for your hunt, then you will increase your odds of success, reduce the chances of something going wrong, and just have more fun over there. Plus, the book is just really interesting and entertaining. You'll learn all about hunting the most popular species of game in Africa: buffalo, leopard, lion, elephant, hippo, crocodile, and most of the really popular species of plains game from southern Africa like kudu, impala, wildebeest, etc. The Perfect Shot 2 is available anywhere books are sold, or you could just click on the link in the show notes to buy your copy from Amazon and help support the Big Game Hunting Podcast in the process. Okay, now let's get started talking about lion hunting. Okay, Kevin, as always, it is wonderful having you back on the show. Thanks a lot for joining us today.
My absolute pleasure. I've been looking forward to this for a while.
So would you like to start off with one of your more interesting lion hunting stories from over the years?
With pleasure, John. This story dates back 40 years, so it's not a hot-off-the-press story, that's for sure. In the early days in Zimbabwe, when the country was vibrant and booming, the Zimbabwe Hunters Association was a very strong and very well-run organization. And I was very fortunate. My tutor PH, the guy that taught me how to become a PH, was actually the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer of the Zimbabwe Hunters Association. He was by the name of Charles Grobler, and he was a fantastic mentor. And in those early days, this was in early 1980s, there were certain areas in Zimbabwe were set aside for citizen hunting only. There were areas controlled by the Hunters Association, and only members of the Hunters Association through a lottery and a draw system could get plains game and dangerous game hunts in these areas. And one of the areas they had was an area called the Tule Circle. The Tule Circle is in the south of Zimbabwe, where Zimbabwe abuts up to Botswana. And it's a very unique situation. If you look at a map of Zimbabwe, you'll see in that bottom corner there's an absolute perfect circle. And that was known as the Thule Circle. And there was a fort there. And during the early days of when the pioneers got into Rhodesia, as it was then, the railway had ended at Mafeking. And from Mafeking into the country of Rhodesia, all the goods had to be transported by ox wagon. And at the Fort Thule was the Shashi River. And the Shashi River is a huge sandy, about a mile wide sandy riverbed that these ox wagons had to cross to get into the bottom end of Rhodesia. And that became a very well-known safari area. And I was hunting there it must have been in the early 1980s. I was hunting plains game, and one of the farmers in our area, an elderly gentleman, he was a very experienced hunter. He was very lucky to draw a lion tag. And he managed to find an own kill. So I know in your questions you're going to ask about what different methods of hunting lion. And this was a really old dethroned male, and he killed a large eland bull. And this old guy found the fresh carcass of this eland bull, and he'd seen the lion tracks. And when he found it, luckily the lion had gone off to drink, because lions will normally make a kill, eat their fill, and then go off to drink. But an own kill lion, because the eland is such a huge animal, then an own kill lion will then return to the carcass to guard it, basically from vultures and also from hyenas. So this guy quickly, when he realized this, and he knew that the lion would lie up in the nearest shade of this kill, just because when he had a full belly and he'd be obviously drunk, he was going to just lie there and sleep, and then periodically make sure that the vultures and any hyenas that snuck around would chase him off. So I quickly built a blind, and sure enough, in return, this most magnificent old lion. I know the lion well, because eventually this lion was a full body mount in one of the Harare gun shops. Anyway, the lion was lying in what we call the sphinx position, classically lying on its belly with its shoulders and paws spread out in front of it, just like the classic sphinx sculpture in Egypt. And he shot at it with a 375 H&H using a 270 grain Barnes X. The lion wasn't exactly side on him. It was quartering very slightly. And this old guy was a very experienced hunter, and the rifle he used was an unusual rifle because with the 375, it had a stock with a thumb hole through it. And it was a very chunky and awful looking rifle. And the reason this old guy used to do a lot of game culling, you may recall in my previous podcast, I mentioned that in the middle 1980s to the early 1990s, the cattle industry boomed in Zimbabwe as a result of what was known as the Lome Convention. Mm-hmm. And us being able to export beef to the European Economic Union, which quadrupled the beef price, and everybody did well. So a lot of areas that had game in them switched from game to cattle farming because cattle farming became very lucrative. And those guys needed to get rid of their game, and so they employed guys to come and cull their game. And this rifle was used as a culling rifle, so it had a stock almost like a bench rest design, and had a fixed power scope. I think it was a 6-power, might even be an 8-power, which was perfect for shooting animals off the back of a vehicle from a dead rest, just to cull. Anyway, I used this rifle to shoot this lion, and the lion was lying not exactly side on, but slightly quartering away. And he shot it where he used to shoot all his game animals with the 375, shoot them just behind the shoulder, so the shot goes into the top half of the rear part of the lungs. Anyway, he took a shot with this combination, and the lion ran off, favoring its one leg. And he waited an hour and a half, and then decided to follow the lion. And he got charged by this lion an hour and a half later. But when the lion charged him, the very obviously running on 3 legs. Its right front leg was broken. The bullet actually hit the humerus bone. That's the bone just below the shoulder blade. And it came from him so fast and he had his rifle was totally inappropriate for a followed-up wounded lion charge situation. But luckily for him, exactly 10 yards in front of him was a little erosion gully. And this lion had its head up looking at him and coming for him. And with its good leg, it put its good leg into the erosion gully and tipped and somersaulted and landed on its back facing backwards 9 paces in front of him. And he actually shot it when it was lying on its back facing backwards. I mean, he was so lucky. If it had that little irrigation ditch hadn't been there, or that erosion ditch hadn't been there, that lion would have got him for sure.
My goodness.
Anyway, he killed the lion and he took it back to camp and he skilled it, and he knew that we were hunting in the same area. And I sent a message to me. He said, how was it possible for a lion that had been shot behind the shoulder, just like every other animal he'd shot, and he'd shot hundreds of animals behind the shoulder? How was it possible for that lion to still be alive an hour and a half later? So I got him to take the front leg off and to very carefully open up the chest cavity. And that bullet had not passed through the chest cavity. That bullet had passed in front of the chest cavity. So that thoracic cavity was intact. And I've listened to your other podcasts about how bullets kill. And anyways, when a bullet goes through the thoracic cavity, the first thing it does is it lets air into the thoracic cavity, which deflates, the lungs deflates, and it causes hemorrhages. The lungs have a rich blood supply. In animals, deflated lungs can't oxygenate the air. Plus, there's bleeding into the chest cavity. It eventually results in the animal dying, the brain running out of oxygen, and the animal dying. But this lion was alive an hour and a half later after what he'd been shot. He thought it had been shot through the chest cavity, and it turned out the bullet passed in front of the chest cavity. And it broke the opposite shoulder. If it hadn't broken that opposite shoulder, that lion would have got him for sure. So it suddenly made me realize, man, that the anatomy of a lion is very different the anatomy of a lion and a leopard is very different to the anatomy of all the other antelope species. And we say, and if you've seen pictures of my book, how far back in the thoracic cavity the heart is situated. Well, it's not really all that much further back. Only the difference is that the front shoulders of lions and leopards, and probably cheetahs as well, because they are such athletic animals, the shoulders are situated a lot further forward. And where you shoot a lion is very different to where you shoot some of the other animals. The other thing that obviously we're going to discuss appropriate calibers and cartridges. So that his combination, almost like a bench rest rifle in 375, was probably the ideal combination to shoot at a stationary lion. But that combination to try and stop a wounded lion charge with a rifle that has no handling qualities and probably scoped way too high. Remember, this was 40 years ago, and there were very few variable scopes 40 years ago. So you either had a fixed 6 power, might even have been a fixed 8 power scope. To try and shoot a charging lion with a fixed power scope, I mean, you're just looking for trouble. And that guy was very lucky to survive that incident, mainly out of just ignorance, basically, because none of us knew then where the heck the lion's heart was situated when it's lying down in the Sphinx position. So he was very lucky to survive that incident. And it was a real eye-opener to me, and was sort of one of the reasons why I thought the perfect shot really needed to be written, was to make people aware of such situations like that.
Now that is very interesting, and I'm looking at the perfect shot right now, and you've got a picture of a lion. Sorry, what was that?
And there's an old guy there. I think that's the picture that I'm talking about. Isn't the rifle there it hasn't got a thumb-hole stock through it? There's a picture of the rifle in my perfect shot, I think.
So the picture I'm looking at is of a live lion just lying there in the Sphinx position, like you're talking about. The perfect shot one in my first perfect shot book, the first edition. I'm pretty sure there's a picture of that lion in that book, in my book. Well, I'll pull it out real quick and take a look at that one too. So can you talk to us while I'm finding this? Can you talk to us a little bit about how big lions get, how their behavior socially and otherwise is different from some of the other cats, where in Africa they live, that sort of thing?
All right, let me just probably back up a little bit. So I believe that the movie The Lion King has done more damage to Africa than many people realize, because Lion King has changed the perception of how people see lions. The majority of people today think that a lion and a warthog sit around a campfire at night singing happy little songs together. In the truth be told, lions kill and eat fat little happy warthogs. lions are a very misunderstood species, I believe, because lions kill and eat other lions. There are some horrific statistics. Of all the lion cubs born in the wild, 50% of them die within their first year and 30% die in their second year. So only 20% of all the lions that are born in the wild survive to maturity. And the vast majority of those lions that are killed and eaten by other lions. I mean, nobody really wants to know this fact. There's a movie that everybody that's interested in lions needs to see. It's a documentary, and the documentary is called Brothers in Blood. It was made in the game reserve that border the Kruger National Park, and there was a coalition of 5 lions, and they had names. One of them was Mr. T. I forget names, but over the period of this documentary, those 5 dominant males killed and ate 181 other lions.
Oh my goodness!
It's the most graphic, horrific documentary. I mean, there's a lioness in estrus, and 2 males are fighting with each other for her attention, and somehow she gets mixed up in the fight, and suddenly they kill her and they eat her. They just kill her and eat her. I mean, and who would ever thought that lions are rampant cannibalists? You know, they kill and eat each other. And there's a well-known fact about lions is called infanticide. So when all lions want to become dominant pride males, and so let me just back up a little bit. Lions cubs that are born into a pride, if they survive into their second year or into their third year, they eventually get kicked out of the pride by the dominant male, because he doesn't want his own kids to be competition with him. Prides are made up of, lionesses are made up of prides. And the pride is a family unit. Every lioness in a pride is related to each other. They are either full sisters or half sisters with each other. So how do the genes move around? By lions taking over pride? We have what you call a pride takeover. And if the dominant pride male is displaced by another male, or is displaced by a coalition of males, the first thing that those new males will do is they will kill and probably eat all the suckling cubs in that pride. And the reason they do that is that there's a reason for that, is that when a lioness is lactating, or any animal is lactating, there's a hormone called prolactin. Prolactin is a hormone which stimulates milk production. And prolactin inhibits the estrous cycle. So even with humans, they say when a human woman is lactating, she's not likely to reconceive if she wasn't. She's less likely to reconceive if she wasn't lactating. So by killing all the cubs, the lionesses, then their milk dries up, and that is the kickstart to get their hormonal cycle starting again. So they'll come into estrus, and then the new pride male or males will then mate with the females in estrus, so his own genes are passed on. It's called infanticide, and it's a very well documented phenomenon. It's also one of the reasons why when we talk about lion trophy qualities, there are now certain guidelines in place which prevents the shooting of certain trophy male lions, and that basically you're not allowed to shoot a dominant pride male. Because if you do shoot a dominant pride male, that means that the pride has lost its protection. Another male will take over the pride, and then he will kill all the suckling cubs in that pride so he can pass it on. But nature is very smart. All nature tries to ensure that no animal mates with his own daughter. So lions are normally, by the time a male lion is 2 years old, he's as big as a fully grown lioness. So sometimes in his third year, he'll be displaced out of the pride that he was born into. And then he becomes a loner, and he has to fend for himself and learn how to hunt for himself, and he has to have a hard time until he's big and strong and old enough to make a play to take over a pride himself. And this is when males that are kicked out of pride sometimes join up with each other to form coalitions. Obviously, if you have a coalition of males has a better chance of displacing a dominant male if they're more, it's 2 against 1 or 3 against 1. So by the time a lion is in his 5th or in his 6th year, he's big and heavy and strong enough to fight for the right to take over a pride. And those fights are often extremely violent affairs because the lion that gets dethroned, the lion that is now kicked out of a pride, very often gets injured in that fight. And I have a wonderful selection of old photographs of old lions, and I've got photos of lions who had their eyes ripped out or they've been badly mauled in that fight. Then from that point onwards, the new pride lions that will take over will kill any cubs that are in the pride. Those females will come into estrus. They will mate with those lionesses. The gestation period of a lion is 110 days. Those cubs will be born, and if they survive into maturity, by the time those lioness cubs are ready to be mated, which is early in their 3rd year, nature has it that that the father of those lions will be displaced. So when he's late in his 8th or early in his 9th year, they generally pride males get kicked out of the pride. So that makes sure that's just nature's way of saying, listen, I won't have the opportunity to mate with my own daughters, because by the time I'm late in my 8th or early in my 9th year, my days as a pride male are done. From then on, just displaced or dethroned lions have a very hard life, because basically they've got old and they've got slow and they've got middle-aged old men, and now they have to fend for themselves. And they don't last long. In the Kruger National Park, which has a very healthy lion population, there are no lions older than 10 years old in the Kruger National Park. We know this for a fact. And I've had the opportunity to do some autopsies of lions. And one of the lions, because these lions basically starve to death. What actually happens, they start to scavenge. They're old and slow. They can't catch prey for themselves. They start living on game birds and hares and porcupines and things that they can catch. And when I was at the Wildlife College, one of the safari camps close by to us, one of the guys opened the door and there was an old lion lying on the doorstep of one of the laborers' cottages. And he was in pathetically poor condition. And they shot the lion and they brought it to the college, and I did a post-mortem on it, or did an autopsy on it. And in that lion's stomach was a kilogram, that's 2.5 pounds of porcupine quills. Nothing else. There was no.
Oh my goodness. Ooh.
Only a photograph of it, unfortunately the photograph was blurred, but there was a kilogram of porcupine quills in that lion's stomach, nothing else. So but I'm trying to get back to the Lion King. People have this wonderful perception of lions as being noble and fantastic animals and strong and all the associated connotations with lions. But nobody realizes that the vast majority of lions lead absolutely miserable deaths. There's nothing honorable about a lion's death. Lions starve to death and get killed and eaten by hyenas, or they get killed by the lions that displace them. And it's a completely different characteristic of lion. That the general public have no idea what a hard life lions have. I mean, lions have a terribly hard life. In their lifetime, they have the 2.5 years that they're a dominant pride male. That's their glory years. And after that, boy, it's the slippery slope to nowhere. So when we start talk about the hunting of lions, it's those old lions that have been dethroned. The lion that's been kicked out of the pride, and he's got 18 months maximum of his life left. That's when I believe that's the type of lion that should be hunted, because rather a quick death from a well-placed bullet than to slowly starve to death. You may have heard just recently there was a safari guide who was very badly mauled by a lion in Namibia. Are you familiar with this incident?
No, I'm not. No. Tell us about it.
This guy was lying in his tent and he got attacked by a lion, and it was mauling him through the side of the tent. And they wouldn't let go. They actually killed the lion by driving over it with a Land Cruiser. They drove over it while it was mauling him. And I just took one look at that lion, and I just said, well, I knew exactly the reason. It was an old lion that was just starving. And hunger is a very powerful motivation for an animal to. And this lion had stumps for teeth, and it was very old. But I mean, that was just a starving lion. And just so damn hungry, just attacked him through his tent, bit him through. He was sleeping up against the tent, and it attacked him through the tent. And I'm sure if you just Google Namibian lion attack, you'll see pictures of the guy lying in hospital with all these big punchy wounds in his arms and his legs. And there's a picture of the lion there as well, just this pathetically thin, emaciated old lion. I love lions, but I mean, I think the public need to be aware of what a lion's life is really like. It's very different to the story that was portrayed in The Lion King, and everybody thinks lions are different to what really happens out here in Africa.
You know, between The Lion King and Bambi, Disney did a lot of bad things for people's perceptions of hunters and of wildlife in general. Yeah, and like you said, too many people still believe that stuff. Now, that was very interesting what you were saying about the mechanisms that nature has to keep a male lion, or I remember we talked about this in a previous episode, a bull buffalo from mating with his own daughter. You know, you're there, he's there for a couple years and then gets booted, before his own offspring are old enough to mate with. That was very interesting how it kind of happens in almost exactly the same way in each case.
Oh, every species has its own way. Yeah, I mean, there's very little chance that an impala will ever mate with his own daughters, and elephants are not likely to mate with his own daughters, and certainly lions in natural situations should never get the opportunity to mate with their own daughters. Now, and when we discuss our dear Cecil the Lion later on, I'll discuss a bit more about that as well.
Perfect. Now, going back to what we talked about right at the beginning, I found in the original edition of The Perfect Shot on page 100, it does have the lion that you were talking about, and the old man there does indeed have a thumbhole stocked rifle with a very big scope on it, and that is a very big, looks like very old and rough-looking lion.
It was a magnificent lion. That was the perfect lion to take. That lion had probably just been dethroned. So he was now on his own, and he was a lone male. There was no other pride around, and he managed to kill a big eland bull. But that old man in that picture very nearly got killed that day, for sure.
Oof. Oh my! So you've already covered quite a bit of stuff in this discussion, and you touched a little bit about on the social life of lions and how they live in a pride like that. How big does a mature male lion get? And same question for a mature lioness.
A big male lion will get up to 400 pounds. I mean, and 400 pounds is huge because lions are incredibly strong. 200 kilograms, which is probably more, 450 pounds. And a big lioness is probably 300 would probably be a big lioness. But a lot of people don't realize, and I've got another story which I'd like to relate to you, just talked about lions, is that a lion can do the standing 100 meters in 3 seconds. So he can run 100 meters in 3 seconds. Now that is 3 times faster than Usain Bolt. So when I finished writing The Perfect Shot, I've mentioned in some of these previous podcasts, I'm married to an amazing woman who is a fanatical wildlife photographer, and she's not scared of the African bush. So when we finished writing The Perfect Shot 1, she said to me, "What do you think about getting a charging lion picture for the cover of the book?" So I thought, that was a really fantastic idea. I thought it'd be a really impressive photograph. And she was at school with a guy called Steve Pope. And Steve Pope was a very well-known Zimbabwe safari guide, and he was a photographic safari guide. And he had a concession in a place in Monopool at a place called Chitaki. Chitaki is a spring up against the escarpment in Monopool's game reserve. And she got chatting to her, said, "No, there's an old lioness in this pride that he said he described it as she will give you a snot squirt. Snot squirt, so basically she will give you a mock charge." So we said, that's fantastic. So Catherine, myself, and old Steve, we went down to Chitaki. We camped there for the night. And the next morning, we drove around until we found the tracks of a pride of lions, and we tracked them. Steve had his rifle. He had a 4.58. Catherine had a Canon camera. And remember, this was film camera. This was the days before digital camera, digital photography. And all I had was my binoculars. And we tracked these lions, and we caught up to them at about midday. And they were lying in some broken Mapani scrub, all sleeping. And just a discreet cough and one of the lions woke up and saw us, and there was just a grunt, and the whole lion pride disappeared, except this old lioness just lay there on her stomach, growling at us. And she was about 50 meters away, lying on her stomach. So Steve said, listen, we just have to intimidate her, and she'll charge us, but she's going to stop right in front of us. And if you run, you're dead. You just have to stand it down. And Captain's camera in those days was a semi-professional Canon camera. It had an autofocus lens, and it had motor drive. It used to take 4 frames per second. Just a chuk like that. And it had a function on the camera it's called AV mode, where the camera focuses as the shutter releases. So you can stand in a road, for example, and have a motor car driving towards you, and you can take a series of photographs of all of them in focus as the car comes towards you. So we put Kath in the middle. Steve was standing there holding his rifle, and for some stupid reason I was holding my binoculars. And he said, okay, on the count of 3, we're all going to take one step forward. We were going to intimidate her. So Kath was set up with the camera was already. The lioness was 50 meters away. And I'm built like a brick outhouse. And I think I might have intimidated the lion because she'd locked those laser beam eyes into mine. So we took, on the count of 3, we all took one step further forward, and that was the trigger. That lion, the revs went up in her growling, her tail lashed 3 times, and she just charged straight for us. And she stopped. If I'd taken a pace forward, I could have kicked her. I mean, she stopped right in front of me. So there was a cloud of dust, and my God, she just growled at us, and she disappeared. And it was the most frightening experience I've ever experienced in my life. And I said to Cap, did you get it? Did you get it? She said, yeah, I've got it on film. So we took that precious roll of film, and we drove 6 hours all the way back to Harare to have it developed. And there are 3 photographs. And the last photograph, as the lion stopped in front of us, as she stopped so close to us that we all got showered in pebbles and dust. The camera focused on the dust, and the last picture, which would have been the most spectacular picture of this lioness growling at us, is out of focus. So my dear wife said, well, let's just go back and do that again. But I don't think this happened 30 years ago, and we argue about this often because she did not get the impact of the looking through her camera lens. That lioness was locked into me like a guided missile. And she stopped looking with those eyes, and the lioness's, the stare of an unblinking stare of those big ochre eyes of the lion are extremely intimidating. I think that is one of the most stupid things I've ever done in my life, and it's I haven't been scared many times in my life, but I did not enjoy being charged by a lion, standing there with a pair of binoculars in my hand. It was a bloody stupid thing to do as far as I'm concerned. But it just shows you, maybe there was a delay, but that lioness came to us within about 1.5 seconds. And if we're going to talk about lion charges and things like that. If you cannot shoot your big game rifle like a sporting, and you're shooting sporting clays, you've got absolutely no chance. I mean, that lion, I could not believe how fast that old lioness charged, how quickly she came for us. It was just greased lightning, very scary indeed.
Now, there is this is extremely impressive, just how darn fast this lion was. I mean, how did they compare to leopard as far as just raw speed like that over a short distance?
Okay, so there are some more interesting facts. I've just finished reading a very interesting book called Drums in the Morning by Wayne Grant. And if you're interested in lion hunting, Wayne Grant is a very experienced lion hunter. And he writes about lining, and he said there are different facts. If you have to follow a wounded leopard, there's an 80% chance that you will get charged. If you have to follow a wounded lion, there's a 20% chance that you will get charged. If a wounded leopard gets hold of you, there's a 20% chance that he'll kill you. If a wounded lion gets hold of you, there's an 80% chance that you will get killed. Lions are just incredibly strong. I mean, a lion that can kill a buffalo, I mean, like we humans are stick figures when it comes to how strong lions really are. Lions are easy to kill. I mean, you should think, it's a bit like that leopard. I mean, that lion, stationary lion on a bait, side on, you're in a blind, dead rest. You know the anatomy of a lion now. I mean, it should be really interested, easy to kill. But gee, it's just something about lions and leopards, boy. They're just so darn intimidating that the shots get fluffed very easily. And then, but the big difference between a lion and a leopard, and why the lion charges are easier to stop, put it that way. Of course, a lion is a lot bigger, but a lion will always warn you before he charges. He'll always grunt or he'll always growl, and you'll know when you hear that growl or you hear that grunt, that lion grunt, you know he's coming, and that gives you that split second of warning to anticipate the shot, get your rifle into your shoulder, get your shooting foot, if you shoot right-handed, you get your left foot forward, that type of thing. A leopard comes to you silently. 1 minute he's just on you in a blur. You don't even see him until he's ripping your scalp off. But that lion gives you that little second of warning. And that's the big difference. And of course, he's a lot bigger target as well.
Something that often gets passed off as fact that I hear all the time in books about cats and TV shows and all that stuff. I don't know if it's true, but talking about in a pride situations that it is the lionesses that do the majority of the hunting, whereas the big male lions are mostly focused on protecting the pride from hyenas, other lions, that sort of thing. Is that true in your experience?
Very much so. It's not all the case. I mean, big lions will come in and assist with the killing of a buffalo and things like that. But definitely, a lion spends a lot of time patrolling his territory. And I've seen it many times. You get a big male lion, he'll back up to a bush and he'll urinate into a bush. And then he deliberately sticks his mane and he sticks his head into that bush. So he's got his own urine on his mane. And then he'll go walk about. You walk these territories. He'll just walk his territory, his territorial boundary, and he'll scrape and he'll urinate. And as he's walking along his mane, he's brushing against bushes. Then he's just laying down the boundary, saying, "Hey, listen, I'm the boss here. Don't come into my territory." Also, they're defending them from lions and defending them from hyenas, and also from other lions that want to come and take over the pride. So lions spend lots of time fighting. And that results in facial scarring. And the older a lion gets, the more scars he has on his face. And it's we can age lions very accurately. And the more scars he's got on his face, the older the lion is. And so that's true. But big male lions will occasionally kill an animal sometimes. And when they go on walkabout, they sometimes they kill them for themselves and they will eat for themselves. And when they're a pride, when he's in the dominant pride male, he's still a very fit and robust animal. But he also lives on the spoils of his females. And quite often I've seen it when a whole bunch of lionesses will kill a buffalo, and then here comes the big boy. He just chases everybody away and he feeds at his leisure. And, lions, you'll see pictures of little cubs snuggling up to dad and things like that. That's after, but the lions have no table manners at all. At dinner time, it's everyone for yourself. It's squabbling and fighting, and they fight a lot with each other. And lionesses will fight with males as well. And I've got a lovely series of photographs that Kath, my wife, took of a lion trying to mate with a lioness. She obviously wasn't ready to be mated. And that lioness gave that lion a hard time, slapping him and scratching his face, and got some beautiful action photographs of lionesses fighting with males to get rid of their unwanted attentions.
Where in Africa do lions live?
Where there's game animals and there's no many people. That's the trouble with lions, and why lions are under pressure is that lions and humans cannot coexist. I mean, humans in Africa need their cattle and their donkeys, and they need their goats and their sheep to survive. It's for their meat, and lions eat those things. So wherever there's too much human habitation, lions get displaced. And the lions are very easy to kill by snaring or poisoning. And so in the great game areas of Africa, Tanzania, there's still some lions in Kenya, lots of lions in Botswana, there are lions in the Caprivi Strip, and there are lions in the Kruger National Park, and in the parks that border on the Kruger National Park. And then throughout South Africa, there are between 8,000 and 10,000 lions in captive breeding facilities, which is another hot potato topic or can of worms topic, which I think we need to discuss at some stage in this presentation.
Yeah, we'll talk about the captive bred lions with the other hot potato with Cecil at the at the very end of it. And so it seems like way back in the day, you go back a couple hundred years, really before European settlement and whatnot, that lions were, like you said, almost anywhere there was game, right? They may have been from Cape Town to Cairo, and over the intervening years, their habitat has become more and more fragmented because they need lots and lots of space with lots of game in order to live. And then, like you said, it's very easy for them to come into conflict with humans, right? They go and they eat someone's cattle or their donkey or a human being. The lion gets shot or it gets poisoned or whatever, and they just kind of get funneled into what seems to be now the really big national parks or the really big hunting conservancies and whatnot in those areas, right?
That is correct. The lions and humans cannot coexist. Leopards can live within, as we discussed in our leopard conversation, when there are leopards in some of the big cities in South Africa. Leopards quite happy to take domestic cats and dogs and stuff like that. But lion can eat 25% of his body weight at a single sitting. So if a lion weighs 200 kilograms, he can eat 50 kilograms of meat at one time. Quarter of his body weight he can eat at one time. So, for a lion, an impala is just a hamburger, That's a snack, and they are ferocious consumers of all forms of protein. And you get some of these big prides. Some of these big prides need to kill 2-3 buffalo a week just to keep themselves going. I want a giraffe, and it's what's interesting in the Wankie National Park, which is where there are now way too many elephants, and I hope we're going to eventually talk about elephants at some stage, but there are lions now that live solely on killing and eating elephants. And our wife has got some magnificent photographs of actually a lion on an elephant's back and two big dominant male lions killing like a 5-year-old elephant. The 5-year-old elephant stands sort of 5 feet at the shoulder, maybe 6 feet like that, and those lions can kill an elephant. They're immensely powerful, immensely strong creatures.
Gosh, they really are the kings of the jungles if they're killing everything they want, to include to include elephant and lion too.
And a giraffe. A giraffe. Giraffe is an enormous animal, and lions very successfully kill giraffes as well.
So in your book, The Perfect Shot, you say that you hunt an elephant with your legs, a buffalo with your guts, and a lion with your heart. Can you elaborate on that statement a little bit more?
I believe where does your courage come from? I think your courage comes from your heart. And if that is true. So Alfred Peeves, the guy who wrote about the Book of the Lion, he says that you're scared 3 times when you hunt lions. The first time when you see his tracks, the second time when you hear him roaring, and then the third time when you see him for the first time. And I believe it's true because, man, when you're face-to-face with a lion on his own terms, they can be extremely intimidating and frightening. And I've got another story for you. I think I'm the only person in the world that's ever defended myself from a lion with a bottle of Johnson's baby shampoo. I've written up the story.
Tell me more.
I was on it's in my book. It Shouldn't Happen. I think the story is called Madonna. I was with my neighbor. He was doing his PH license, and he was my apprentice. And we went to the Chirara Safari area, that's in Lake Kariba. We had a buffalo leopard hunt, and he was going to hunt both of those animals because he needed to get your PH license. You needed to shoot 4 dangerous game animals yourself, and if he could shoot a buffalo and a leopard, that would be 2 of the 4 that he needed. And they went down to the Chirara area and they set up camp because I was doing a freelance hunt up in the Chetty Safari area, which is further up the lake. And I spent the whole day driving down Lake Kariba. And as I was getting close towards where the camp was set up on the Chirara River, I could see it was just starting to get dark, and I could see the lights of the camp flickering in the distance. And I had to cross a dry riverbed, and on the opposite side of the dry riverbed was a really steep bank. And in the middle of the road on the bank, there was this blonde mane lion. We called him Madonna. He had this mane that was bottle blonde. And he just sat in the road and just looked at us. And I was hot and I was tired and I was probably a bit agitated. So I put my Land Cruiser into a four-wheel drive, and I just gunned it up this bank. I had to get around to get up this bank, and the lion just didn't move until I eventually hit him with my bull bars of my Land Cruiser. Anyway, the lion ran off and got into camp, and Kath, my wife, and my neighbor and his wife were there, and they said, "Man, this place is just crazy with lions. The lions have been around the camp," and because the camp was near the riverbed was dry, but there was a little waterhole. And the camp was overlooked this waterhole, and all the game would come to the waterhole, and the lions, of course, just camped at the waterhole because it was McDonald's for them. And this lion became increasingly bold, and it was the weekend, and we brought our kids down for the weekend, and we shot a buffalo that day, so we had the buffalo hanging in the camp in the skinning shed, on the slaughter pole at the skinning shed. And my friend and I put our wives and all our kids on the back of my Land Cruiser, and we went for a game drive. And as we had left the camp, there came old Blondie trotting down the road towards the camp. And he saw the Land Cruiser, and he charged the Land Cruiser without hesitation, which was quite frightening because, you know what, a safari Land Cruiser, it's just an open back with seats on it. My kids were fairly traumatized to have a lion charge the vehicle, and by hooting and shouting, managed to stop the charge. Anyway, we carried on for the drive, and when we got back, my trackers and my skinning staff were in great trauma and consternation because that old Blondie came into the camp, and he took the buffalo off the slaughter pole in our camp and took it and ate it right there. So the buffalo, another friend of ours joined us for the hunt, and it was getting towards the end of the hunt, and the guys were going off to the leopard blind, and Kat, my wife, said to me, "Don't go and sit in the leopard blind, just come and sit with us women folk around watch the sunset," and which we did, and it was evening. And as it was starting to get dark, I'll watch the guy that was our camp attendant came to tell us that our shower was ready. And you know, in the safari camp, a shower is just a bucket suspended across a convenient tree branch, and there was a grass screen around it. So Kath and I went to shower, and she showered first, and she was busy drying herself, and I was in the shower, and I just put shampoo in my hair, and I was busy washing my hair when Kath said to me, "I can hear something in the grass outside." So I was tall enough to peer over the grass screen, and there was old Blondie, this bloody lion, stalking us. And as soon as he saw my eyes, he locked his eyes into mine, and I didn't steady him down. And with my other hand, I reached around and I found the bottle of shampoo, which I just used to use for my hair. And I picked up this family-sized bottle of Johnson shampoo, and I threw it at him. And I actually hit him on the head with the bottle of shampoo. And then I was out of that shower, stark bollocks naked. I ran through the camp, and I had my 9-3 hanging from the tent pole. And there were a lioness actually ran right through the camp and underneath the dining room table and knocked one of the chairs over. And the three women that were in camp by that stage were all fighting with each other to try and get in the one door of the Land Cruiser, which was parked in camp. And I was standing stark bollocks naked with shampoo in my hair and the rifle in my hand and lions running around all over the show. It was a rather frightening experience. So,
my goodness, jeez.
So that story's in my book. But lions can be when you're that vulnerable, and I've mentioned Tataki, which is that where we went to go and where that lioness charged us, and not long after that incident, a guy was killed in the shower by a lion at Tataki. He was out taking a shower just at dusk, and a lion grabbed him out the shower and killed him. So the lions can be. That's why I say you hunt a lion with your heart, because the chances of being killed by a lion if you don't do things right are pretty good.
Well, so what would you say are the most common ways for people to hunt lion?
The most common way to hunt lion is to bait them. Lions are lazy animals. They'll sleep 20 hours a day if their tummy's full. And you basically find lions. And the good thing about baiting the lions is that if you're going to get a pride's going to come to the bait, you can see whether the male you want to, is he a pride male or not. With modern day, with trail cameras, it's very easy to get photographs of the lions, and then you can age him. Because the way things stand at the moment, it's in most of the countries that hunt lions, a lion has to be at least 6 years old. So a 6-year-old lion is in his absolute prime. That's when he's on top of the mound. He's probably going to be in the peak of his life is in his 6th year. So the ruling at the moment is you're not allowed to shoot a lion, and he must be at least 6, but he must not be a dominant pride male. And I believe I'm a bit more conservative. I think that they should change that to 8 because, as I mentioned, you get these dominant proud males that go walkabout. They go patrol their territories. And if you're driving along and you just happen to walk into a beautiful male lion that's all on his own, and you haven't seen any other lions, you say, he's a lone male, and the guys will shoot him. Opportunistically will shoot him, and that could very well be a pride male. But by the time a lion is 8, you can see he's now really starting to look his age. His quality of his mane is not quite as good. He's got lots of facial scarring. I believe that's the right time to shoot a lion. 8 or 9, when he's at the end of his breeding tenure, preferably when he's past his breeding time, when he's been dethroned. That's the time. The other hunting method, and the way I've hunted it, is once a lion has been hunted, once a lion has been exposed to hunting pressure, he's been at a bait, and lions learn very quickly from poor hunting tactics. If guys don't know really what they're doing, and lions can become very shy around a bait. So I did a lion hunt in the Chetty Safari area, where the only way you could get a lion was that you hung baits, and when the lions fed on the bait, you tracked them to where you tracked them from there. So that was late in the season. So one of your questions I see is, when is the best time to hunt a lion? I believe the best time to hunt a lion is towards the end of the hunting season, when it starts to get really hot, when there's not much water, all the grass has been eaten off, and there's lots of loose sand and dust, because you hunt a lion by tracking him. And that's got to be the purest form of lion hunting, is to track a lion. Because there's a very good chance that when we find a lion, he's either going to be sleeping, or it's going to be a close quarter confrontation. It's going to be a real exciting event, shooting a lion on his own terms. And then it's a situation like that. What rifle do you use? How do you go about it? And I did a hunt where we tracked a lion. I've also written this story. The story is called The Honeymoon Hunter. We tracked a lion for 20 miles. He got a whiff of us, and once he smelt us once, we tracked this lion down from a bait, we tracked him into a rocky canyon. And so the Chetty Safari area is a very rugged safari area, and it was this canyon. There was at a sandy sort of bottom of the canyon, but big, almost huge boulders, half of the size of an automobile. And this lion was walking along, weaving his way through these boulders. And we came to where he urinated, and there were still bubbles on the sand. We must have been really close to him. But we caught up to him at about midday, and as so often happens in Africa, the winds can swirl when it starts to get hot. And so all of a sudden, we just felt the prickle of this, or the coolness of a gentle breeze on the back of our necks. And within 10 or 15 meters, that lion's tracks disappeared. He smelt us, and he climbed out of that canyon from jumping from rock to rock. We never found his track again. So we went to the closest water hole. The next morning, we found his tracks. He'd eaten one of our baits. We tracked him to the second one of our baits. He'd eaten that as well. And then he just turned and he said, "I know you guys are after me." And he just walked in a dead straight line for 20 miles. And my poor client, unfortunately, had a medical condition. He developed an inguinal hernia. And he walked that 20 miles with his hand firmly ensconced in his scrotum, pushing his intestines back to where they came. So we ended up walking 40 miles in that day. We walked 20 miles, and the line crossed the boundary into the Chidurera Forest Reserve. It was our end of our concession. We turned around and walked 20 miles back. And that was the end of the guy. That just killed my poor client. But that's how clever. And this lion must have been the most magnificent lion, because he'd eaten, I reckon, 100 pounds of meat. And he still walked 20 miles with 100 pounds of meat in his gut. And his mane was dragging on the ground. It was very fine dust. And you could actually see, because like someone had swept his tracks with a leafy branch. His mane was dragging on the ground. He must have been the most magnificent lion. And years later, I was speaking to another PH by the name of Rory Mill, and he used to hunt the Chidurera Forest area, and he said, we knew that lion. That lion, we hunted him many times. Nobody ever shot him. He was just too darn clever. If he smelled you once, that was it. You had no chance of getting him. So those lions they learn really quickly how to be super smart. But if we go back on lion character, lions are two different animals. During the day, lions are lazy and sleep a lot, but then during the day, lions are scared of humans. And I've walked into lions many times on buffalo hunts in my time in the Zambezi Valley. And every time that we've bumped into lions, they've invariably turned and ran away. The old lioness that chased us is the only time I've ever had a confrontation with a lioness, and we provoked a charge. But as soon as it starts to get dark, man, the lion undergoes a Jekyll and Hyde transformation. Nighttime is lion's time. They become bold and arrogant, and they lose all fear of humans at night. And that's when they can become really, really scary. Having lions coming into camp and things like that, trying to get the carcasses off your slaughter pole. Now, you have to realize the lion sees as well at night as we do during the day. Now, they have very good night vision, so they see fantastically well at night. And nighttime is they become bold and arrogant and sometimes aggressive. And, of course, lions are also well known as become man-eaters.
You talked about how you think later in the season is a better time for tracking lions. Does it really matter so much, the timing, if you're going to be baiting them?
Not really. I think definitely not. But basically any time of the year. I mean, guys shoot lions in the early start of the season when it's still green and lush. But if the lions are notoriously difficult lions, then definitely later in the season is better. But for baiting, sort of any time will work. Just as long as there are lions in there. Lions, they have territories, and the good PHs know the lions in their territories. They know the prides, and they know the ages of the lions, and they know basically where they are. They know where to bait. So theoretically, if you're going to bait a lion, you can bait a lion any time of during the hunting season. But if you want to track a lion, definitely later in the season, the better.
Well, what are your thoughts on appropriate, or rather ideal and appropriate cartridges and bullet selection for lion hunting?
The lions are thin-skinned and lightly boned, so I believe the 375 is the perfect choice for a lion. 416 probably a little bit better, but then the right type of bullet. You want a quick expanding bullet, bullet that opens up quickly, releases its inherent hydrodynamic energy, and creates a large wound channel. So I mentioned before in my leopard talk that North Fork have the PP, the percussion point, which expands within 2 inches of penetration. That would probably be my first choice for a lion bullet. The next best bullet I think for lions is the nozzler partition. Nozzler partition, the frontal core is not bonded, so it expands quite rapidly, and it variably sheds its frontal core, which reduces its weight by 30%. And then as that core comes out, it also creates secondary projectiles, which just increases the size of the wound channel. 416, if you use the 416, I'd probably go to a 350 grain bullet instead of a 400 grain bullet, so up the velocity a little bit, and just have like a 350 grain 350 grain nozzle partition would probably be my choice. Any bullet that's going to expand quite quickly and open up quite quickly. The original Hornady, the Hornady DGS, which wasn't bonded, they were quite fragile. Also the Woodley protected tip, or the Woodley weld core, and they also open up quite quickly. Any bullet that's going to expand quite quickly is suitable for the first shot of the lion. Obviously, your first shot of the lion, you need a scoped rifle, and illuminated reticle probably would help. A variable, and a 1 to 5 is probably going to be absolutely adequate, because the shooting distances are not great. I mean, 100 meters would probably be a long shot at the lion. Probably going to shoot between 50 and 80 meters off a steady rest. And, and an animal that's hopefully stationary and well positioned. So one thing we learned after that incident with the old guy and the lion lying in the Sphinx position is that you never, absolutely never take a shot at a lion lying down, or any animal for that matter, especially with buffalo as well. Initial shot should always be a standing lion. If the lion has got a very full mane that covers the shoulders, then the only obvious choice is to go for the hard shot, which is, if you'll see in my perfect shot books, is quite a lot further back than most people realize. A lot of people say if it's standing, just shooting just behind the shoulder, if you a careful dissection, that's actually quite a risky shot, because the sternum rises up and the spinal cord drips down. So just behind the shoulder, there's a very narrow wedge of the thoracic cavity. But 6 inches or so further back behind the shoulder, the thoracic cavity is nice and wide. If you shoot him exactly in the middle of the body and you take out the top of the heart and the center of the lungs, it's a very effective shot, but you're going to get lots of roaring and growling and lion flopping around and biting itself, and it's, quite a dramatic scene to shoot when a lion gets shot through the thorax. The other option is, if it's an older lion or the mane is not as full as, and you can actually see the shoulder blade. The shot that I prefer, or I really like, is the high shoulder spinal shot. You shoot him through the shoulder blade and the spine that lies beneath it, and that line will just drop right there. Jerome, the guy, the gunsmith at Bernie Caron, I was chatting to him about it, and I suggested that he take that shot in a recent lion hunt, and I heard via the grapevine afterwards that it worked absolutely perfectly. He shot the line just pitched forward on its nose and expired right there. So you think that shot, he's going to have to go and look for it. There's no tracking involved. The lion shoots and he just dies instantly right in front of you. Having said that, the rifle that is suitable for the initial shot of a lion is invariably not the rifle that is suitable for a wounded lion follow-up. You've got to have a rifle that comes to the shoulder like a Purdy or a really good handling shotgun, because, as I mentioned before, if you get charged by a lion, you've got 1.5 seconds to shoot it. So when I was at the Wildlife College, we had dangerous game training courses. And one of the tests that we did was you stood with your rifle on low power. There was a fire plate at 50 meters away in front of you. And you had if you were standing with your rifle out of the shoulder, on the word go, you had to click off your safety catch and take an aimed shot at a fire plate 50 meters away. This is just standing and shooting. And then we would time that first shot, then you had to reload and take a second shot at the same fire plate. And invariably, the first shot was taken within 1.3 to 1.5 seconds, and then a reload out the shoulder and shoot again, and it was normally about 3 to 3.5 seconds to get that second shot off. So if a lion comes to you from 50 meters away, and given that you've been warned and you already got your rifle in your shoulder, it's still going to take you about a second to get your sight picture, aim at the lion, and take a shot. And in that 1 second, that lion is covered about 30 meters. So if you are not thoroughly prepared, and we mentioned this in my other talks on about how to mount your gun, how to shoot quickly, shoot with both eyes open, have a gun that fits you perfectly. You just got to point and shoot. You haven't got time to aim. And you can't just point and shoot with a scoped rifle. Maybe you can if it's on one power, but that's when the double rifle comes into its own. And I've been toying with the idea. I actually had a chat to Wayne Jacobson of American Hunting Rifles, that I believe in a situation like that, you actually don't even need a backside. I said we need a bolt-action rifle with a rib on it, like a sporting clay shotgun, and just a nice big bead up front, where you just don't even need a backside. You just look down the rib and shoot with a bead on the front, like you would shoot at a going away clay at a clay field. And we just thought it might be quite a nice idea just to develop it, to make a rifle like that, to see what it's like, how it works and what it does. Because if you get charged by a lion, boy, you've got, even with a double, you probably haven't got enough time to take a second shot before that lion's on top of you. And then what do you use? To stop a charging lion, biggest caliber you can shoot accurately and comfortably with, and a big, heavy soft point. And the guy I've never had to shoot a charging lion, so I have no experience with this, thank God. But the guy said, if you can just shoot him in the front of the chest, and a lion with that big 500 grain 458 bullet or something bigger and a big soft point just crumples him straight away. Lions have highly refined nervous systems, so if you dump a whole lot of energy into his chest cavity from the front, you invariably just switch off his lights straight away. Also, when a lion's looking at you with his head up and his eyes focused on you, not a lot of his brain sticks up above his eyes. So if you have to shoot him, you're going to have to shoot him probably just slightly below eye level if you're going to give him a brain shot. But the chest is a bigger target, and we would just say just shoot him in the middle. With those big calibers, even if his mouth is open, you have to shoot him through his mouth, or there's enough energy and enough momentum enough to get through if you have to shoot him through his mouth or through his jaw to get into chest cavity, take out his spine, or take out his heart and lungs. So in the charging lion situation, bigger is always better. There was a time of controversy about you could stop a lion with a shotgun, and lots of people have proved that doesn't work. If you have to use a shotgun, maybe a Brenniker slug or some heavy, well-made slug, but hell, we were told when we were training as professional hunters, for charging lion, you use the rifle that you shoot the best and you shoot the quickest with, which is invariably a PH's big caliber dangerous game rifle. And as I have mentioned before, that for Zimbabwe professional hunters, the minimum standard, if you wanted to be a dangerous game professional hunter, was a 500 grain 458 bullet doing 2,150 feet per second or 2,100 feet per second, in that range. How you got there didn't matter, but that was considered the reliable stopping for all the species, and particularly with lions. It will work very effectively with lions if you use just a quick expanding soft point bullet.
Yes, it seems like the shotgun is barely adequate for leopard, and lion is just a whole different ball game for leopard. Much bigger, much stronger and more powerful. And I imagine the same thing goes with someone, say a 30-06, that'll work perfectly, if it's legal in that area for a leopard, but probably not a good idea to be using that even for an initial shot on a lion then, huh? Well,
lots of guys shot lions with the 303. There was a very famous Shangani hunter in the Lowveld in Zimbabwe. He shot like 110 lions with a 303. But he used 174 grain, that military ammunition. And I'm not familiar if you know the history of that military ammunition. Those bullets were designed to tumble. And they were fairly effective because, a lion is pretty similar to a human, lion chest and a human chest. And, that 303 bullet was, the original bullets had balsa wood caps in the front. And certainly the 303 bullets that I've cut open, the front third of the 303 bullet is all aluminium. So the bullet is basically unstable. The base of the bullet is heavier than the front, and as soon as it meets any form of resistance, it tumbles. And that proved to be fairly successful on lion chest shots on lions because the bullet was tumbling as it went through. And,
now, I know
drastically.
I know John Patterson, killed the man-eaters of Savo with a 303 British as well. So clearly it can be done, but that is a case where, if you had a client, what would you say if you were a professional hunter and you had a client that wanted to use a 303 or a 30-06 or something like that on a lion hunt?
I would say if you use the right bullet. I mean, I'm trying to remember correctly, but I'm sure that the legal minimum for a lion is at 7mm. I mean, I got a friend that shot a lion with a 270, which I thought was particularly stupid, but he actually was successful. Lions put the bullet in the right place. Lions are quite easy to kill, and the test of a lion behind the shoulder is not much smaller than the chest of an elk or, even a big mule deer. So anything that can get into that chest cavity and basically disintegrate will probably work if you put it in the right place. But you're not going to use that if you're going to follow that wounded lion, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think that file seems to just sort of tick all the boxes. It's manageable recoil because, we have spoken about this before. That shot at a lion is going to come off almost like a bench rest type of shoot, and guys develop flinches when they start shooting the bigger calibers, and that's what you don't want to do, is to horse up or mess up that first initial shot at the lion. That's for sure.
Now you've touched on this subject several times as we've been talking. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you actually evaluate lions as a trophy and doing your age estimation on them and that sort of thing? Just seeing them afield, what are the cues that you look at to do that?
First of all, we look at the quality of the mane. So the mane starts out, it develops in the front, it's got a bib, and then you get what they call the mohawk, which is little hairs in the front. By the time a lion is in his fourth year, his mane is starting to fill up around his ears, and he's starting to get a fulling out and mature. A 6-year-old lion is a lion in his absolute prime. His ears are closed in, he's fully developed, he's big and heavy and muscular, and his mane has got a really good quality to it. The older a lion gets, the mane starts to get a fuzziness to it. In the olden days, women used to tease their hair. Well, I think they called it teasing. You took a comb and you made your hair go bushy. So as a lion gets older, he has definitely more scars on his face, and his mane loses that just come out of a beauty parlor type of appearance, like it's been blow dried. Also, we look very closely at the lion's teeth, because as he gets older, and especially lions that eat the pachyderms, lions that live on buffalo and giraffe and elephants, they very often break the tips off their canines. And as they get older, they start losing their incisor teeth as well. So you get a lion and he yawns, and lions yawn often. You can have a good look at his teeth. If you see his teeth are stained dark and yellow, the tips are broken off, he's lost some of his incisor teeth, and also the pigmentation on the nose. This is not set in stone, but generally as a lion gets older, his nose becomes darker. It loses those little pink spots on his nose. But also, you just see what the lion is. So if his lion's with the pride, well, then he's in his late 5 or early 6 to in his 8th year. Well, then, and he's a pride male, he's off limits. But an old lion, we say an old lion just look old. And when you get a lion that's past his prime, past his dethroned lion, there's absolutely no question about it. That lion just looks his age. It's like humans. I mean, a 40-year-old man looks very different to a 70-year-old man. And lions are the same, And I believe from the trophy point of view, okay, theoretically at the moment, if you're hunting a wild, free-ranging lion, he's got to be minimum of 6 and not a dominant pride male. The ideal trophy, I believe, is a lion that's just kicked out of the pride. And he'll give you, it's like an old Duggar boy, full of character, full of scars, and maybe his mane's not in the world's greatest condition, but that there's a lion that's lived his life and he's now on a slippery slope to nowhere, to a horrible death. That's, I believe, the best quality in a lion.
And so I imagine this is a deal where a professional hunter that has looked at a lot of lions and is very experienced is going to be able to very quickly make a pretty good estimate on how old this lion is then, right?
For sure. Aging a lion is a bit like aging a buffalo. And then I used to teach it. I've got a fantastic presentation of lions of all different ages. And I was very fortunate when I got to the Wildlife College. I found a lion that had a very distinct circular scar on just below his right nostril. And when I got to that line, I aged him to be a 6-year-old lion because he was absolute prime when I found him. And I managed to photograph that lion consecutively for the next 3.5 years. So I photographed him at 6, at 7, at 8, and the same lion at 9 years old. And there was a huge difference it was the same lion, without a doubt. And how he changed in that time period from 6 to in his 9th year. And when he was 6, he looked like a 40-year-old person, and in his 9th year, he looked like a 75, 80-year-old human. He was aged tremendously in those 4 years. And I've got photographs of known 9-year-old lions. There was a photograph called the Pell-1 Coalition. There were 2 main lions, and they knew exactly the day these lions were born, and they followed them for 9 years, and they've got photographs. And I got photographs of these lions when they were 9 years old. And boy, they looked ancient. They looked really beat up and haggard, and like an old pickup truck that's done 300,000 miles. You can just see it's knackered, and those lions look like that.
Well, you've harped a lot on just how haggard and old and scratched up and scarred really old lions are. Do you want to use this as a segue into talking about the Cecil the Lion incident?
Yes, I think it's a good opportunity. It's a good time. So Cecil the Lion did a lot of damage to hunting and the reputation of Africa and hunting. So I mentioned Kath, my wife, is a very keen photographer, and she took all the photographs for my book, The Perfect Shot. So when I was needing photographs, and she was very good friends with a female artist friend of hers, they used to disappear off to Wankie to go and take photographs. And Kath for my book, and this artist used to take photographs, which she used to paint. And funny enough, she loved painting lions, so they got lots of lion photographs. And in 2010, Kath and this other old duck were camping at a place called Ngweshla, which is in Wankie National Park. And Ngweshla is just a tea camp. There's a little rondable hut there, and there's an old African guy that has a kettle boiling on a fire, and you can go in there and make yourself a cup of tea. But you can actually get permission to camp at this tea hut. And there's nothing there. There's one piece of rusty barbed wire that protects the hut. There's no protection. You just camp in the middle of nowhere. But Kath, as I mentioned, was not scared of the bush, and she and this old duck, they pitched their tent, and that night there was a serious lion fight, really close by to where they were. And Kathy's not easily frightened in the bush, but she said she was so unnerved by the ferocity and the closeness of the fight that she actually left her tent and she went and slept in the Land Rover, went and slept in the vehicle. The next morning they went out at first light, and there was Cecil and his half brother Jericho were fighting, and there was a lioness in estrus. And while they were watching this whole melee going on in the fight, suddenly the Oxford University researchers arrived, and they darted Cecil. So Kath, being a no-nonsense woman, went up and said, "What the hell are you doing?" The researchers said, in the fight, Cecil's radio collar had become damaged, and they had to replace the collar. I don't know if they did that or not, but they took Cecil and they put him on an anthill. And they know the anthills in Africa have got big shade trees on it, and they just left him and drove away. And Kath, from the road, Kath and they could see Cecil lying on this anthill, and they watched him through binoculars, and they thought he was dead because there was no sign of. He didn't look to them like they were breathing. He was breathing. Anyway, they kept going back. They kept on eyeing him the whole day, and he just did not move. Anyway, it got dark, so they went back to the tea hut area, and they slept the night there. The next morning, they went back, and Cecil was still lying on the anthill. He had unmoved whole night. And only at midday the following day did he start recovering and got up and staggered past them. And I've got some really good photographs of Cecil when he was 10 years and 5 months old. And what is absolutely amazing, and he has not got a scratch on his face. He looks like he has just come out of a beauty parlor. Also, it was a very interesting time. You might recall at that time of the year, there were a whole lot of elephants were poisoned with cyanide in the Wankie National Park. Do you remember that?
I do remember that, yes. Mm-hmm.
So the cyanide that killed all the elephants also killed all the hyenas in that area. And that was in the same area. And so Cecil was left by the researchers who were threw their hands up in horror at being killed by Dr. Palmer, were quite prepared to take Cecil and dump him on an anthill and just leave him there unprotected, anesthetized for 36 hours. He survived that incident because there were no hyenas, because all the hyenas had been killed by the cyanide that killed the elephants. My theory on it, and I think the whole thing about changing his collar was a bull story, was because I'm sure that the lioness in Eastus was one of Cecil's daughters. And the researchers who've been following this pride did not want Cecil to mate with his own daughters. That was my suspicion, because I can see no other reason why they would leave him. As a wildlife veterinarian, and it is absolutely unethical. If any animal that is darted in an area where predators occur, you stay with that animal and you guard it and protect it until he's fully awake and respond to any predator challenge. That is the ethics of handling the narcotics and darting and handling wildlife. That is the ethics of it. For these guys, just to take old Cecil and leave him on an anthill for 36 hours unprotected was the heart of unethics. But I think and by the time he came around and he was compos mentis, the lioness was off heat, and old Jericho and the lioness had disappeared. So I think that those researchers were certainly playing God. And Cecil, I believe, why would he still being in a pride at 10.5, where every other lion in Africa is kicked out of a pride by the time he is in his ninth year, most pride males are kicked out. In the Kruger National Park, which is not all that far away from Wankie, the lions are dead by the time they're 10. And there's a picture of old Cecil at 10. He did not look his age. I believe he was protected and probably being fed by the researchers, or maybe the safari companies that used him as a tourist icon. And he would come and lie next to tourist vehicles. That's why he was so well known, because he was almost habituated to humans. And that makes me very suspicious as to why he was habituated. Because I'm sure he either came to the vehicles for protection or for food or something like that. That whole thing was an absolutely unnatural situation. So by the time old Dr. Palmer got to hunt old Cecil in 2012, Cecil would then have been 12 years old. And, I mean, he must have been ancient by then. And he'd have then eventually been kicked out of the park. He wasn't lured out of the park by baiting. He'd been dethroned. He'd been kicked out of the park. And when animals get kicked out of the territories, they have to go somewhere. And the national park the whole park is divided up into large territories. So he had to go somewhere. So it's logical that he left the park where he was unfortunately shot with a poorly placed arrow. And when he was wounded, he didn't run back into the park. He didn't run back into the park. He went the other direction. So in theory, Cecil was the perfect lion to hunt. It's just the unfortunate publicity and poor old Dr. Palmer not getting it right and shooting it with a damn crossbow, which I don't think is, I'm pretty much against that. That's what led to the whole debacle and just caused us a whole storm of unpleasantness that the hunting industry certainly did not need.
It's really hard to separate, the fact from the hysteria with the Cecil the Lion incident. As far as I could tell, it sounded like he was hunting with an outfitter that had, they could actually hunt lion, but they were hunting specifically in an area where that outfitter didn't have they didn't have a quota or whatever. Like do you know anything about that? Was there anything illegal that they were doing?
The whole, the hunting industry in Zimbabwe is pretty tightly controlled, and that whole everything was thoroughly investigated. And at the end of the day, nobody did anything wrong. That was all blown out of proportion. My understanding was that nothing was illegal was done on the hunt. And I think the greenies, the people who threw up their hands in horror about it, were looking for any sort of excuse to try and to twist the truth. But my understanding was that the PH that did it, and he's actually the cousin of a good friend of mine. He did absolutely nothing wrong. Anything he didn't do is back the shot so that Cecil didn't get wounded. And I think, but I've got photographs. Cecil was collared, definitely, but I've got photographs of collared lions, and there's absolutely no way that you can tell that lion is collared. That mane covers the collar completely, and you can't see that the lion is collared at all. And so to say the lion, why do you see the collared lion? Well, you can't see the collar, especially if it's the light, it's first light or last light, And the way I believe it, that they were feeding on, giraffe was hit by a train because there's a train line that runs next to Wankie. And Cecil was scavenging on a giraffe carcass that had been hit by a train. That's when they found him. So that would be typical for a displaced lion. He's now turned into a scavenger because, no lion's going to pass up any free meal if he can.
Oh, interesting. So you don't even think that was a bait that they set out intentionally for him? They just happened upon something that he was eating on, and like you said, kind of guarding his own kill, staying in the area.
Yeah, that was my understanding of it. The story that I got, that there was a giraffe was hit because the rubber line runs through the safari area. And, the trains go up and down, and the giraffe got hit by a train, and that was it.
No, very interesting. That like I told you, before we started recording, that was a lot of stuff that I had never didn't make it into the news, right? And as with anything, I didn't want it to go into the news. Yeah, it was a lot of hysteria surrounding it, and yeah. So do you even think that that the hunters even knew that it was Cecil the Lion, or they just knew, okay, this is a big mature male lion past his age, this is a good trophy?
My gut feeling tells me they did not know that was Cecil, because I'm sure I know what it looks like when he was 12. I've got my photographs of when he was 10 and a half years old. So in 2 years he could have aged a lot. And just a big old mane lion out of the park. You can't see his collar. It's a perfect line to take. Oh shit, we've just shot this bloody national icon, I think it was just. And I felt sorry for old Dr. Palmer and the fallback. I mean, he certainly didn't deserve all that. That's for sure.
Is it legal to shoot a collared animal in Zimbabwe?
I believe so. Because these guys don't take these collars off. These researchers are really keen to put collars on, but when the batteries run flat and now you can't track the lion, they don't go and look for that lion to take the collars off them. They just leave them on. And my understanding was that it's certainly not illegal to shoot a collared lion because there's lions, and I've got pictures of lions that died of old age and they still got their collars on them. Mm-hmm. And you can't see that collar.
In a lot of places,
you don't want to try and Sorry, what you don't want to try and do is then hide the fact, go and bury the collar, or just say, listen, hey, we shot this lion, we've got a collar on it, we didn't see that a collar, but we didn't do anything legal. The collared lions move out of they get displaced and they lose their territories and they move huge distances to looking for an area where they can survive and evade the other territorial lions, the dominant pride males. So they move huge areas, getting away from getting out of trouble, because once he's lost his dominance, then he's got nowhere to go.
In a lot of places in the U.S., as far as I know, it is legal to shoot a collared deer or elk or whatever. So I'm not surprised to hear that. That's probably the case in Zimbabwe as well. Well, do you want to touch on the other big can of worms tonight with the captive bred lions?
Yeah, I think this discussion would be incomplete if we didn't talk about captive bred lions, and that is another very controversial topic it's divided the hunting community in South Africa. FADA, the Professional Hunters Association, used to be a very strong organization, and when this whole anti-canned lion hunting story started up, there were a group of professional hunters, and I take my hat off to them. They did not support it, and they started their own organization now called Custodians of Professional Hunting. And so we've got two rival hunting organizations now. One supports canned lion hunting and one totally against it. And it's unfortunately, hunting in all forms is under such pressure from the social media that we all need to stand together. We don't need this can of worms to divide us, that divide and rule story. But I've never been a fan of canned lion hunting, and there's a reason for that, because it's a business opportunity. In nature, very few, compared to the number of elephants that were hunted and the number of buffalo and the number of leopards are hunted, the number of lion hunted annually is a fraction of that. And it's extremely expensive. You go and hunt a lion in Tanzania today, you're probably going to pay $150,000. Certainly, in South Africa, the only place where you can hunt a wild lion is on the borders of Kruger National Park, and they have probably one lion a year that gets hunted. So those lions are in huge demand, and $150,000 to go and hunt a wild, free-ranging lion. A canned lion, you can shoot a canned lion for 25, 30 grand, probably even less now since COVID. So people that wanted to go and have a lion for their collection, they didn't mind if they shot a lion in a fenced-in area, lion that had come out of a cage a couple of days before and released into an area and used to humans and all that. And some people say that canned lions are dangerous. I've never been on a canned lion hunt. I certainly will never go on a canned lion hunt. And there are so many arguments for it. They say, well, people breed buffalo to hunt them and people breed sable to hunt them. What's the difference between breeding lions? But I don't know. That's one of those arguments. There's no clear right or wrong. I've tried very hard when I was preparing for this talk, thinking about it. If you say to hunt a wild lion is a very valuable diamond, then to hunt a canned lion is a cubic zirconia. Or a wild lion is a Rolex Oyster watch, and a canned lion is one of these $150 Rolex ripoffs. That's between the two. Some people don't mind. Some people wear a zirconia ring and will wear a fake Rolex, and they'll shoot a canned lion. And the other people that say, hey, no, that's not the real thing. I believe a lion hunt is like a buffalo hunt, and I've said that before. It should be the whole African experience. You should walk into elephants. You should track buffalo. You should see lions. You see everything that nature has to offer, or wild Africa has to offer. To hunt a lion in the Orange Free State of South Africa, where you can see power lines and there's a jet flying overhead and you can hear the cars on the highway. To me, that's not a lion hunt. It's a lion kill. It's not a hunt. When the lion's fully mounted and in the trophy room, the person that owns that trophy can bullshit as much as they want to how they hunted that lion. But when I walk around the safari shows, Allison at SCI, and I see those mounted lions, nice manes, no scars on their faces, and I look at all that and I said, there's no ways in hell. Every one of those lions that I look at, you can just see that they came straight out of the can. And I don't know, John, it's one of those, I don't think there'll ever be an answer to that question. Maybe there will be, because South Africa now is all of a sudden starting to clean up its act. And there's proposal put together by the new minister that they want to make it illegal for the captive breeding of lions in South Africa to be made illegal. And there are 8,000 to 10,000 lions in South Africa. The donkeys and the chickens there are nervous because that's what these poor lions get fed on. You know, a lot of them are just killed for their bones, which are exported to China for the. But I read lots of articles. I follow this whole industry, and some of the articles written by some of the well-known gun writers in it, and they just talk about cattle-killing lions that have escaped out of Botswana into South Africa and spin these bloody stories. Those stories, that's all just absolute BS. They are all those lions are just bred for the captive market, and you know some guys will shoot 200 lions a year. You know, I mean 200 lions a year at really $30,000 a lion is a very, very handsome income. And these guys, of course, they're fighting this whole thing tooth and nail because it's a very lucrative way of making money. You know, lions are extremely productive breeders. They're lazy animals. They have large litters. If you feed them well, they breed like crazy. And they just, you know, the lions in all the zoos in Europe have to be put onto the fertility pool to stop them from breeding. So the guys here, the lion farms in South Africa, these lions pop out babies and then they take the babies away. They raise them artificially in cubs so that they all survive. And they have these farms. And some of the conditions on those farms are absolutely pitiful. It's just like chickens in a chicken house, you know, lions everywhere. Some of them not well nourished. Some of them are getting scurvy and diseases from poor nutrition because they feed them chickens, all the chickens that die from the broiler houses, and feed them donkeys. And another source of lion food for these things is all the aborted fetuses from the slaughterhouses. So all the animals that come to get slaughtered and are pregnant, all those fetuses, those get fed to the captive lion industry. So I think it's a messy business, and I've just said I don't want anything to do with it whatsoever.
You know, with everything else, I mean, just like the Cecil deal, it's hard for me to separate fact from fiction sometimes because, right, like you, I've never been on a captive bred lion hunt. I've never been to any of these operations. I've never seen it firsthand. So really all I know is kind of what I read about it, and then my friends that are kind of in the hunting industry, what they tell me about it. And the things that are being said are, once again, I don't know if they're true or not, but they're like you're talking about, they're terrible. You talk about how the cubs are taken away from the parents at a young age and raised artificially. I've heard that they're raised by hand, so they're used to humans, and they're tame. They're not afraid of people. I've heard stories of guys being led out there to shoot a quote unquote sleeping lion that has been drugged, or that may even already be dead. You know, it's some terrible ethical stuff that is going on with a lot of these hunts.
Oh yes, I agree with you. We've heard all those stories, and you know, and it's fair chase hunting. And that lion's got to have the opportunity to get away. That's the whole thing about fair chase. You know, I've been on lion hunts where we were unsuccessful in hunting a lion, and there's nothing wrong with that because we had a fantastic hunt. We didn't just have the opportunity. But if you've got a lion in a fenced-in area and you just keep on driving round and round until you find him, you'll eventually kill him. And is that fair chase? It's not, you know. It's shooting a horse in a paddock. You know, that lion, I believe, the understanding of fair chase, the animal has to be able to live naturally in its own environment. It has to be able to breed naturally in its own environment, and it has to have the opportunity to escape pursuit. And if the area is in a fenced-in area, that lion has got no choice. It's got nowhere to go, cannot escape, and it's going to eventually just get shot because it's. Is that fair chase? I don't believe it is. So I'm very much against the whole practice of it.
So if there's a American hunter, for instance, that is interested in going hunting in Africa for lions, what are some of the tells that he should look for to ensure that he doesn't accidentally book a place that is offering hunts for captive bred lions?
Well, just basically what countries the hunt going to take place in. If you're going to hunt a lion in South Africa, there's a 99% chance that it's captive bred. As I said, the only places where you can hunt a wild lion in South Africa is on the APNR, the game reserves that border the Kruger Park. And they hunt sometimes no lion a year. If they're going to hunt a lion in South Africa, there are no the only wild free-ranging lions are in the national parks. And if it's a wild free-ranging lion, they don't hunt those lions in the national parks. They hunt them in the private land around them. So if he's going to hunt a lion in South Africa, then it's a 99% chance it's a canned lion. Hunting a lion in Namibia, 100% chance it's going to be wild bred. Hunt a lion in Zimbabwe, 100% chance it's going to be wild bred. Hunt a lion in Zambia, 100% chance it's going to be wild bred. Hunt a lion in Tanzania, 100% chance it's going to be wild bred. And it's going to be determined the price. If I'm going to hunt a wild lion for $30,000, we'll just say, mate, that lion's a captive bred lion. If that lion's going to cost you substantially more than that, well, then it's a wild free-ranging lion. And get to know the areas. I mean, if you're going to hunt a lion in the Zambezi Valley, there's absolutely no way that can be a captive bred lion, you know? If you're going to hunt in the Selous or all the other famous lion areas, those are wild free-ranging lions. And you pay the price for that privilege to that rare diamond. You pay the privilege. You're not buying a Saucony, you're buying that rare diamond.
It seems like it seems like getting a truly wild, large, mature lion may be one of the most difficult trophies a person can get in Africa these days, from both the financial perspective and from just the difficulty of the hunt perspective.
I would agree with that. Yes, a wild lion's pretty much like a 100-pound elephant. Hey? They're out there, but man, they're probably less 100-pound elephants out there, but pretty similar, you know. Where a good, say, an 80-pound elephant and a wild lion are pretty much in the same category.
All right. Well, we have talked at length about all kinds of stuff involving lions tonight. Is there anything else that you think you need to add to the discussion before we wrap up?
Maybe another little humorous story. So I love fly fishing. In the eastern part of Zimbabwe, there's the Eastern Highlands. Are you familiar with Zimbabwe at all?
I am, yes.
In Yanga, have you ever heard of a hotel called Troutbeck Inn? And then there's the Yanga National Park. I was fishing there with the
northeast Zimbabwe, right?
Yeah, against the border with Mozambique.
Mm-hmm.
And I was fishing in a remote little trout stream, and I saw a lion track, and I thought, my God, there's a bloody lion here. And I was fishing, and I had this awful feeling that something was watching me. I was alone. I was miles away from my vehicle. And I turned around, and sure enough, there was a big, mature male lion looking at me. And I got the hell out of there because all I had was my fishing rod and a Leatherman. And the story goes that in that area, the African chief there was a very powerful African chief. And when he died, the tradition was that you had to be buried in the standing position. Now, it's very difficult to dig someone a grave so you can bury you standing up. So what they did, they buried him between got some big copies there with big boulders, and they buried him between where two boulders came close together, and they made sort of a little thatched structure, and they buried him there. And a couple of days later, the whole village went to pay respects to the chief, and as they got to his grave, a lion climbed out of the grave. There was a young male lion was busy chowing on the dead chief. But you know, Africa are very superstitious, so they were all convinced that the dead chief had transformed into a lion. And from then on, lions became sacred. So if a lion killed one of their cows or killed one of their donkeys, it was just that they didn't do anything about it because the chief was hungry and he needed some food. And because of that, and because normally a lot of lions, as you mentioned, with lions and humans don't really coexist all that well. And as soon as a lion does something wrong, it gets either poisoned or snared. But because they were all convinced that the lions in the area now with the dead chief, they left them unprotected. And it got so bad that there's a very famous hotel in Inyanga called Troutbeck Inn. And they had a stable of horses where it was very popular for guests to go for a horse ride through the beautiful forests in that area. Until eventually, the lions killed every one of the horses at Troutbeck. That was the end of the horse ride. And eventually, they had to go in and sort out the lions because they just became so many. And the reason for that was because the villagers, or people in that area, thought that all the lions were their reincarnated chief. So how's that the story for Africa for you?
You've got some very good lion stories, and that's a really good one to end on. Right up there with your one with the throwing the shampoo bottle at the lion from the shower.
Now I've had an interesting time. I've spent lots of time in Africa, and lions have played an important part of my life. And I love lions dearly, but I feel sorry for them because they have a hard life.
Yes, it definitely sounds like it, and I think you did a very good job of explaining in this discussion on just like you said, just how darn tough it is, and what a rough life it is, and how many of those lions die very young, and how the ones that make it to older age don't necessarily almost never have a happy ending.
But please, if you're interested in this, look up that movie Brothers in Blood, and I think you'll be fairly horrified as to what lions are really like, because certainly the general public have no idea what lions are really like.
I think that's a good idea, and that's a good recommendation, and so I think that's also a good place to wrap up. So once again, thank you for a very interesting and illuminating discussion tonight, Kevin. Have a great evening.
Thank you, and I hope your listeners enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed it myself.
Well, man, that was quite the discussion. As always, Kevin shared some great stories, a lot of useful information, and he did not shy away from letting us know what he really thinks about controversial topics. In that vein, I did want to provide a bit more information and context about Cecil the Lion and captive bred lion hunting. First, with regards to Cecil, criminal charges were initially brought against the PH and the landowner by the Zimbabwe government all the way back in 2015. However, according to the most recent information I could find, the government eventually dropped the charges against both men in 2016. And as far as I know, no criminal charges were ever brought against the hunter, Walter Palmer, by either the government of Zimbabwe or the American government. Even so, with the massive amount of public outrage that erupted afterwards in the wake of that whole deal, I know there must have been tremendous pressure put on the Zimbabwe government to quote-unquote do something about that hunt. The fact that all of the charges were eventually dropped or dismissed, despite all that pressure, as well as what Kevin told me in this interview, leads me to believe that whatever failings those men may have had otherwise, and whatever ethical concerns people may or may not have about the way they did things, especially on that hunt was indeed conducted legally. But like I said, it's really hard to separate fact from hysteria. The media, not surprisingly, hasn't printed much at all about any of those men since they made a brief mention of the charges being dropped in 2016. I'm sure we would have heard all about it if there would have been a criminal conviction regarding that hunt or anything else coming to light from any of them since in a negative way. And if this were an open and shut case of a true illegal hunt, like we were led to believe by many in the media, then I don't think criminal charges against those men would have been dropped, and they probably would be in jail right now. And in any case, like Kevin said, Cecil was a good example of the sort of lion that hunters should have been targeting. He was well past his prime, and he had already enjoyed plenty of opportunity to pass on his genetics. A 12-year-old lion is ancient in the wild. And regardless of what the animal rights activists would have you believe, his life wasn't going to have a happy ending, and as unfortunate as it was that Walter Palmer didn't make a good initial shot on Cecil, he likely would have suffered an even more horrible death otherwise at the hands of another lion or a hyena. Or he could have been like one of those other lions Kevin described, with a belly full of porcupine pills, or with broken, worn-down teeth, and having to resort to eating humans. Now, with regards to captive-bred lion hunting, that's another one of those really controversial topics, even among African hunters. To be clear, the rumors I've mentioned about hunters unknowingly shooting a drugged lion that was quote-unquote sleeping and things like that are just that. They're rumors. They came from people I know and trust, but that's not something I've seen firsthand. If true, those actions are most definitely illegal, even in South Africa, where hunting captive-bred lions is legal under certain circumstances. Now, even if those rumors are not true, I still don't like the practice. If you want to go and shoot a captive-bred lion, well, that's your business. I won't personally, and I would wager that most other hunters would feel the same way if they truly understood what the deal is with those hunts. Harvesting a truly wild and mature male lion, in line with the sort of conservation practices Kevin and I discussed here today, is incredibly difficult. The story of the hunter that Kevin guided with a hernia who had to walk literally dozens of miles in one day on a lion hunt is not unusual. So those hunts do not come easy or cheap. They are not for the weak or the faint of heart or for those who like to take shortcuts. And I really think that's fitting, right? Lions are the king of the jungle, and a successful lion hunt probably shouldn't be easy. If you're going to kill one of them, you should probably really have to work for it. Now, anyway, that is just my 2 cents, and I do not expect everyone to agree with me. Now, even if you don't agree, there are a couple of other things you should know about hunting captive bred lions. First, as of 2021, captive bred lion trophies may not be imported into the USA. That wasn't always the case, but it has been that way for a few years now. A lot of places that sell captive bred lion hunts will indeed state that those lions may not be imported into the USA, which is another tip-off regarding the sort of place that you're dealing with. This regulation is, of course, subject to change, but as of right now, wild lions from, if my memory serves me, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Tanzania, South Africa, Botswana, and Namibia may be imported into the USA on a case-by-case basis. Now, additionally, SCI does not accept captive bred lions for entry into their record book. So if you're an American whose dream is to have a lion taxidermy mount in your home and or enter it into the record books, then a wild lion is the only way to do that right now. Now, in any case, I think that will just about do it for this episode. Like I mentioned earlier, you need to pick up a copy of The Perfect Shot if you don't already have it. As Kevin said, lions aren't hard to kill, but it is easy to mess up the shot if you're not prepared. So study his shot placement diagrams in detail because you don't want to have a hunt like that go sideways. If you have the first edition, then I also think it's worth it to buy a copy of Kevin's more recent edition, The Perfect Shot 2. And I will put a link in the show notes where you can get your own copy. I will be back next week to talk about how the Africa hunting experience varies from country to country and why it is so important to have realistic expectations before you head over for that first hunt, as well as your first hunt in a country you've never been to over there. Now, the fact that you are listening to this podcast means that you are serious about making your dreams come true. Follow me on Instagram @TheBigGameHunter and send any questions you have to me about the show on Instagram via direct message, or you can email me, john@thebiggamehuntingblog.com. Remember, you can make your dream hunt turn into a reality, and we can help. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you back here next time on the Big Game Hunting Podcast.
This show may be over, but we have plenty more for you on our website. For more information on today's topic, as well as lots of other useful hunting resources, head over to thebiggamehuntingblog.com. We look forward to having you back for the next episode. But until then, happy hunting.